everybody. Reporting to you again from the Glamour City, Hollywood.
The process of getting Regenerative Organic Certified is going to be more challenging. Most farmers in the global north do not really have a strong system for showing how they treat their workers. And so if we haven't had much time to chat about the worker fairness component. And here in America and most countries in the global north and Europe as well, this is a real issue where we have in this country over 65% of our agricultural labor force is coming from undocumented individuals. We have a shortage of labor in agriculture. And so we need these people to get out and harvest our food. But it's difficult because they're not documented typically, or they may have a social security number that isn't really the accurate one. They may be working for labor contractors who are bringing people in, trafficking labor in. Children may be put to work. There's a lot of issues. Women, farm workers experience sexual harassment. 8 out of 10 of them experience sexual harassment on the job. So there's a lot of issues where protections need to be in place. We saw this during COVID. Farm workers, food processing workers, livestock, like anyone in the meat processing plants were dying because they didn't have safety protocols in place. And so, these are really important aspects of our food system that are hidden from view and that people don't realize that our cheap food system is coming at the cost. It's coming at a cost. No matter what, there's hidden costs. And I think what we really need to do is apply theories and principles of true cost accounting to our food system.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Elizabeth Whitlow, Executive Director at Regenerative Organic Alliance. Welcome to the show today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So tell us, why did you start Regenerative Organic Alliance back in 2017?
I didn't start it, but it was started by the Patagonia, Dr. Bronner's, and the Rodeo Institute. And these are 3 organizations that are really well known for being leaders in different categories or the organic sector especially. And those 3 organizations came together out of a desire to really strengthen the organic law and build a vision for a future of agriculture. So they came together and they started looking at the organic law in the United States, the National Organic Program, and they saw there were some areas that they felt really needed improvement. This is in an era when hydroponics were just about to be approved and were approved to be allowed for organic. There was a lot of concern around kind of an industrial model entering into especially livestock sector in the organic rule. And so they really wanted to address those areas of concern as well as that of labor, which is not considered in the organic program in the United States. And so they brought together those concerns and invited other stakeholders to the table and created their vision for the future of agriculture. And they called it the Regenerative Organic Certified Framework. Then they brought me in to help them oversee a global pilot program, and I can get into more details of that.
Yeah. So as I'm listening, it's fascinating because of the fact that the organic movement has been around for decades. And of course, it's taken a lot of effort and sacrifice on the part of traditional farmers to become organic certified. But creating this new niche category, regenerative organic certification model, that's interesting. And you mentioned also hydroponics because 3 years ago, it is interesting because we have seen some pretty astounding new growth in burgeoning industries like hydroponics, aquaponics, and aeroponics that are moving away from land-based, soil-based, and into vertical indoor farming and whatnot. Tell us about give us a little bit of history lesson in terms of why we should be concerned about industrial agriculture and how that could seep into new types of industries that are cropping up that we don't think of necessarily inheriting some of these things.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I'll first say that there is a place for hydroponics and for container growing, maybe in an urban area in the winter or an area that doesn't have access to farmland immediately around it in a time of year when you can't access greens and you really want healthy greens. That's fine. I don't have issue with that. I do take issue with it being called organic because it's not grown in the soil. And so for us, the soil is paramount. What we do to the soil, we do to ourselves. And degrading our soil threatens our entire way of life. And so if you look at this fundamentally, there's just so much promise in restoring and regenerating the soil and the land and growing healthy, nourishing foods. It's really irrefutable. I can tell you in these 5 years of doing this work, like there's no farmer that starts to incorporate these practices who then goes back to conventional farming. Conventional farming relies on chemicals, relies on heavy equipment, a lot of fuel, and a lot of inputs. Conventional farming also promises and yields a lot of outputs, but they are not necessarily the best outputs. And so, like, we want to really look at this kind of promise of modern industrial agriculture and see what it's done to us. And it has led to a nation, a world of sick people. And our healthcare system has to pay for the cost for that. Our environment pays the cost for that. And the soil and the land pays the cost.
So I want to first start with the definition of regenerative organic. How do you define it?
Well, I could say broadly speaking, we will talk about this farming as a holistic approach to like holistic whole farm approach to that farm in its unique context on this planet. And so it's very site specific. And you can't just have a general definition for regenerative that applies across the world. It's different if it's agroforestry or if it's annual crops. It's different in a temperate zone versus a tropical zone. The way the Regenerative Organic Alliance has defined it, we look at it through a lens of 3 pillars. We look through it soil health, we look at the animal welfare, if there's animals involved, and then we look at the social fairness aspect, like the fairness to the farmers and the farm workers.
Okay, so it's interesting. Well, first of all, that regenerative means lots of different things, and it has to be localized and contextualized for the specific region, which makes perfect sense. But from a policy perspective, because I think there was reference to California state legislature, where there's some initiative to officially define regenerative. How are they supposed to define it when there is a diversity of definitions that could coexist around the world?
It's going to be really hard. I think the state probably stepped into this before they realized how complex it was going to be, not to underestimate their ability to forecast this, but it has been pretty overwhelming, I think, for the state, as they saw there's a lot of interest in regenerative agriculture. It was growing, and there were more and more requests coming in from farmers to be considered as doing regenerative practices. And so the Secretary of Agriculture called for the state to define it strictly for the purposes of policy and programs. However, it has become a very important marketing term, and it's the fastest growing category probably out there in food right now is around regenerative claims. And so I'm very proud that I was invited to be on the state task force. So I've got a really very close-up view of how this is going, and actually everybody can. The CDFA website has a whole page for regenerative agriculture, and they give all the history of what they've been doing to date to set out to define it. And so they had a scientific advisory panel. There's a reader from the Natural Resource Defense Council, and there's a recommended framework that came from the scientific advisory panel. And you can, if you look at the state page, you can see some of the complexity there where they they provided a number of bullet points, 5 bullet points that set out to define it or to capture it. And now there was a lot of interest. And so now they've realized that they need to further hone this definition. And that's what this working group is doing. We're going to be working on honing the definition and making a recommendation to the CDFA Food and Ag Board in hopefully by this summer.
Okay, let's break down the pillars or the components, starting with soil health.
Mhm.
Again, I think our audience is fairly sophisticated, and they've heard for the last 5-6 years the different guests that we've had. So I think they have a pretty good sense when you think about pre-industrial revolution in terms of heavy use of chemicals, fertilizers, and so forth, because farmers will be the first ones to say that they very much have intergenerationally have embraced regenerative farming. So what does it mean, and how is it different from the predating of industrial revolution?
Well, I don't think it's all that different if we go back prior to 75 years ago. We look at these regenerative practices where we farmed for and grew food for thousands of years. It's our high production, high input production model that has really changed that. The regenerative practices that we look at through just the soil health pillar, it's soil health and land management. So we're looking at some of the really core agreed upon principles of regenerative practices, and that is you keep that soil covered. You want to protect it almost like an armor over the soil. You keep living roots in the ground whenever possible. You minimize your disturbance to the soil, because by disturbing it with heavy equipment and tillage, you're destroying the soil microbiome. So, that soil microbiome, just to take a little tangent on that, and perhaps your followers and listeners are well aware of this, but it's an incredibly emergent science. There's more living entities in 1 teaspoon of healthy soil than there are stars in the sky. We've identified about 15% of those. So we have a long way to go to learn what is really happening in the soil microbiome. But what we do know is the soil microbiome does what plant roots cannot do, is it helps them access nutrients and minerals in the soil. And so by creating conditions for healthy soil and a healthy microbiome, we're helping the plants access more of those nutrients. That makes the plants healthier. That makes the crops healthier as well, more abundant. And so that's part of the whole purpose there with, effectively protecting the soil microbiome. Other central and agreed upon tenets of regenerative practices in the soil pillar are going to stem around biodiversity, bringing in more diversity. Nature abhors a vacuum. Nature abhors monocropping. So if there is a monocrop, there will be other things that will come in, and you either control it with chemicals or you control it with physical cultural methods. So by bringing in diversity through, say, cover crops with different types of plants mixed in the cover crop, you're helping service all kinds of needs of the soil and the soil microbiome. Integrating animals whenever possible is a proven practice for improving the health of the soil. There's an exchange that happens between a ruminant's saliva as they're grazing and the soil microbiome, and it activates it further and it builds healthy soil faster. So those are some of the tenets in the soil health pillar. There are others. I probably don't need to go too far into detail unless you'd like me to, but one I want to mention, because it's, we often look to Europe as leading the way, and in some of these cases, like a lot of people are also aligning around the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and how these are impacted in farming and agricultural practices. There's a lot of emphasis now on deforestation, ensuring that there's not more deforestation happening in order to make way for agriculture, which is what we're seeing happen in Brazil, in the Amazon, just, cutting down precious rainforests to convert for cattle and for soybean production. And so we also have a provision in our framework that is that there's no conversion of like pristine forest or peatland or even a secondary growth forest.
So a couple of things come to mind on the soil aspect. Well, first and foremost is that again, you didn't specifically mention it, but I'm sure it's out there, is that one of the most important ways for carbon capture and sequestration is through the soil. And it's, of course, in the context of forests, but also in agriculture as well, because they play a critical role in terms of making sure that the CO2 gets captured and stays there. And the methods that these farmers, especially larger scale farmers and producers, do has a material impact to the ability for us to sequester some of that CO2 or expose it for that matter. So that's one. The second thing is, as part of the regenerative organic definition, is it fair to be regenerative organic if it's using probiotics or other types of new biotech methods to uptake these microbiome, which is certainly the case that we're starting to see?
Yeah, no. GMOs are strictly prohibited because we base it on organic. So GMOs, bioengineering, is not considered acceptable method. It's excluded from organic, and it's excluded from Regenerative Organic Certified. The carbon sequestration potential of healthy soil is really tremendous. There's a lot of data out there about that now. And of course, carbon is a building block for all life, and regenerative organic practices increase the soil's carbon holding capacity. And so for us, what we've really looked at, and there's a lot going on with the carbon trading now, and I think there's a lot of smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of moving parts to that. And our focus is not necessarily on carbon as much as it is on the healthy soil. What we learned through building healthy soil, building soil organic matter, is that those farms, those soils retain water better. Their ability to hold on to water in times of drought and in times of flood are increased by 26 to 30% is what some research is showing. And so this is really important in this time of climate change. I live in Northern California. We've had atmospheric rivers sitting on top of us for the last 2 winters that are devastating communities, and floods are wiping out entire communities and wiping out farms and washing that soil away. And so this is really important when you look at a model where some of our regenerative organic farms are showing footage during these storms, and you see like a conventional vineyard next to a regenerative organic certified vineyard. And you can see the water just seeping in, getting absorbed into the cover crops that are on the ground on that conventional vineyard during the middle of winter. And the bare soil next to it is washing away, washing down the road, washing into the river, and creating further siltation and further problems down the road.
So I think all of that makes sense. But I do want to go back to the point that you mentioned, which is that genetically modified is not organic. But I just want to make sure we're having the same vernacular, which is that there are startups that's been working on, I would make the argument, closer to 10 years around increasing the effectiveness of these microbiome. So it's not genetically modifying the crop certainly, but it's aligned for higher efficacy of these smaller microorganisms to work better so they can bind and create the right nutrients at the root level. But you're saying that still constitutes as non-organic. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, number one, I'm not a scientist, and so I'll have that disclaimer right there. But we work with a lot of scientists, and at Rodeo Institute and around the world, really. So, anything that is going to be modifying a genome or produced in a lab and introduced into the soil is not going to be permitted under organic standards. And I think that nature does it just fine. When you build healthy soil, you don't need to create these other kind of, if you're talking about, like, are you thinking of the coating that's going on the seeds that's coming from some of these other entities out there? Or
No.
Yeah, make sure I understand what you're referencing.
No, I'm talking about companies like Pivot Bio, but that's okay. I think again, I'm intentionally spending a little bit more disproportionate time on soil health, while animal welfare and social fairness, of course, is just as important. But I just want to make sure we, exhaust this a little bit more. Is that to your point, atmospheric river is not necessarily specific to climate action, or climate change per se, but we are seeing general changes, whether it's frequency, volatility, We're seeing Amazon rivers, for example, drying out in certain sections, for instance. Farming is becoming much more challenging than before. And certainly, California is a great area, a case study for that. Again, there's a lot of different microclimates and regions, but agriculture and output over the next several decades is not going to be like it used to be. Florida with oranges, it's not going to be what it used to be. So more and more, we're starting to lose more of the arable land. And I'm not talking about just the United States, but throughout the world. So are we kind of being a little bit too inflexible in the way we define regenerative organic when we say that? Because there are scientists, there are labs and research institutions that's trying to figure out how can they make certain crops still produce well in lack of water, or maybe the other case, too much water, flooding, for instance. And those type of enhancements or modifications that makes these plants and crops more resilient, you're saying that we shouldn't be using it at all in the context of changing climate.
Well, I'm saying that by increasing soil organic matter through these other more traditional regenerative practices also will improve the soil structure, improve stability, increase the soil's water holding capacity. And this is essential for preventing erosion, like maximizing the crop resilience to both floods and drought. They increase the soil microbial life, and so that increases cation exchange capacity, and that prevents the loss of nutrients. So really, the enhanced nutrient cycle continues to build upon itself and increases the health and the resilience of those crops, of the plants and the crops that come from them. What I'm hearing from our farmers, and so this is anecdotally, perhaps, but like even here, again, in Northern California last year, we had heat spikes of 120 degrees right at harvest season. Pretty unprecedented for a solid week. And many of the conventional farmers watched the grapes shrivel on the vine. And our Regenerative Organic Certified farm, Gergich Cellars, was out there measuring ambient temperature, harvesting their grapes, and seeing the radical difference between their vineyard and their neighbor's vineyard, because they're using these more traditional regenerative methods, and they're proving themselves to be perfectly effective. So I'm not sure that I'm dismissing the viability of it or saying that it's not a path to perhaps improving resilience, but I don't think it'll be accepted under regenerative organic because it's an excluded method in organic, and we have our baseline is on organic.
Understood. Let's see. In the last 3 years, my understanding is that your organization has certified some 1 million acres across the world. And in the US alone, there's about, I guess, almost 5 million acres of farmland that is now USDA certified organic, but not necessarily regenerative organic. So can you talk a little bit about efforts being made to convert those that are currently organic certified to this new definition?
Yeah. So first of all, our growth, we are a global program, so we're operating in, I think, over 90 countries right now, and we've had a huge jump in our certified acreage. We're at almost 6 million acres now, with about almost 400 crop types, 397 different types of crops, and almost 200 farms in our program. And so we work, because we're global, we may have one farm that represents 1,000 growers. Like in much of the global south, this is the norm, where they have between 1 and 3 hectares of cotton, cacao, coffee, or some of these other kind of tropical crops. So we represent almost 60,000 smallholder farmers across those 200 acres, or 200 farms, excuse me. So we've grown quite a bit. There's over 1,000 products now on the market with the Regenerative Organic Certified claim. And I expect this to be a very pivotal year, and we're going to continue to grow in the same way. I expect we're going to keep growing by leaps and bounds. We cross different sectors. We produce crops for food, for beverages, for personal body care products, and fiber or textiles. And so those, the growth that's happened in textiles has been somewhat limited to cotton, but we are moving into and testing. We're doing some piloting on cashmere and silkworms in the coming year. And so I think we'll see some real growth in those areas. Hemp, you would think would be a natural crop for us. We initially had some hemp farms, mostly for CBD production and seeds for human consumption, the edible seed portion. Not so much the fiber. We've got a real challenge with the fiber, the infrastructure for processing the fiber in this country. Many years ago, back when we used hemp very exclusively in the U.S., we had a lot of fiber mills, and those have since kind of gone out of business. And so there's a whole infrastructure situation that needs improvement in order to process the hemp. In the meantime, a lot of the hemp that is being used around the world is coming from China, where they have the processing infrastructure.
Very interesting. I think, well, first of all, as a consumer, I love the fact that we are further refining and strengthening the definition of organic into this new category of regenerative organic. However, one of the things that I am mindful is that in the early years, when farmers were transitioning from conventional to trying to become certified organic, it was taxing. It was very expensive. And in some ways, you could make the argument that many farmers were they were bleeding cash flow negative for years before they could actually, be properly certified and be able to get and market and reap the benefits of that. So my question is, this process, while it's making things more stringent, is it also potentially preventing certain farmers from being able to reach these new certification levels? And for those that were the early adopters of it, are they in effect also receiving higher economic rent or premium because of this new distinctive certification level?
Yeah. Okay, so I can break that down for you from my years of having worked on the ground as an organic inspector and visiting thousands of farmers and sitting around their farm table, sitting on the back of the pickup truck in the barn, going through records and helping them understand the law, understand what was required of them to be making an organic claim and to remain compliant. There's always this myth that it's so burdensome and it's so expensive. And I can tell you unequivocally that is not my experience. It's not, I don't think it's true. Number one, the cost of certification for most small farms in my time at a certification agency the average was around $500 to $700 a year. Their annual cost was about the same. And I'm talking about small to medium-sized farms. So it depends what size farm we're talking about and the complexity of a farm. But if we're talking about, say, $1,000 to $1,500 a year, that is the best marketing money any farmer could spend, because they stand at a farmer's market having to tell everybody who walks by, oh yeah, I don't use pesticides and I do this and I don't do this. You just have an organic sign up, and that assures the consumers right away. They don't have to ask any of these questions. And so it's a really good use of marketing money. But to add to that, there is a cost share program that is administered by the USDA that reimburses farmers for up to 75% of the cost of certification for every scope. So a farm that has animals and growing, that's $750, it's $1,500 they can have back in their pocket. Many farmers didn't submit the 2 pieces of paper that they needed to submit: the receipt from the certifier for the annual invoice and a copy of their certificate. It's all they needed to submit to get the money. And so when people complain about this, I think it just, for me, it falls on deaf ears. It's not a viable criticism. It's not a viable critique of organic that it's so expensive. If you're a larger farm, you have sophisticated operations, you have managers, you have data systems that you're using to track everything you do. And if you're in California, you absolutely, by law, you have to track everything you use that is registered as a pesticide in the state, organic ones as well. So you have these records easily available. And those are some of the records that can be burdensome for a farmer. Showing that they are purchasing organic seeds, showing their cultural practices, showing how they harvest and store their crops. It can be as simple as a logbook. a notebook. It can be as simple as duct tape on a box. Like it's really not as complicated as people make it seem. And having experienced it firsthand, I can say that for sure. So that's one thing. The process of getting regenerative organic certified is going to be more challenging. Most farmers in the global north do not really have a strong system for showing how they treat their workers. And so if we haven't had much time to chat about the worker fairness component. And here in America and most countries in the global north and Europe as well, this is a real issue where we have in this country over 65% of our agricultural labor force is coming from undocumented individuals. We have a shortage of labor in agriculture. And so we need these people to get out and harvest our food. But it's difficult because they're not documented typically, or they may have a social security number that isn't really the accurate one. They may be working for labor contractors who are bringing people in, trafficking labor in. Children may be put to work. There's a lot of issues. Women, farm workers experience sexual harassment. 8 out of 10 of them experience sexual harassment on the job. So there's a lot of issues where protections need to be in place. We saw this during COVID. Farm workers, food processing workers, livestock, like anyone in the meat processing plants were dying because they didn't have safety protocols in place. And so, these are really important aspects of our food system that are hidden from view and that people don't realize that our cheap food system is coming at the cost. It's coming at a cost. No matter what, there's hidden costs. And I think what we really need to do is apply theories and principles of true cost accounting to our food system so that we see what things really do cost. And so those are some of the areas that'll be a little challenging for farmers in the global north. But I can tell you, we have a lot of farms to prove that it's possible, and they're doing very well. They're getting premiums. We had it third quarter last year. We work with Spins. They do like marketing analysis of natural food stores, of regular, like the Krogers and the Safeways and Costco's. They look at independent grocers, natural kind of other ways of distributing food. And there was a 39% increase in purchase of Regenerative Organic Certified. And so we were the fastest growing segment of all the certification labels that they were surveying. That was from third quarter last year. We haven't seen the fourth quarter yet. So that'll come really soon. And I'm pretty optimistic because we had more and more products entering into the marketplace. And we actually don't even have a complete list of the SKUs submitted to them yet. We have a small team here. We have a really small team. And so we work really hard. And there's only 8 people here full time at the ROA, and we've grown quite a bit. And I expect more as we get more growth, we start to generate more license fees, then we'll be able to build our team more. But in the meantime, our funding has been, it's Patagonia and Bronner's started this, but we've found other matching funding, and we are bringing in license fees from other brands now. But still a long way to go. And this year we'll be bringing in more resources, I hope, to help us and get us more support to help educate farmers and support them to get certified. But right now I have a small team, and they help farmers. They spend a lot of time on calls and on webinars and on Zoom meetings like this, helping farmers understand what's required to submit their application.
Well, this has been a very illuminating conversation, and I appreciate you educating our listeners on the various myriad of complexities and nuances. I think one of the things as a kind of a departing thought is the ones that desire to improve not just their products but also society and humanity, they're going to embrace this new level of certification. It's the ones that are resistant because they want to continue to use conventional farming practices, pesticides and whatnot, and continue to abuse these undocumented workers and so forth. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that there will be some policies that will mandate some of the larger cooperatives, corporations, and entities that are purely profit focused to really, get on the bandwagon here. So I'm very excited about the work that you guys are doing. And with that, I've been joined by Elizabeth Whitlow, Executive Director of Regenerative Organic Alliance. Thanks for joining.
Thanks so much, Scott. It's been nice talking with you.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.